Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to a Soviet Nazi alliance, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between two wars 1939, part 2 of 3 by TimeGhost History. If you want to check out my previous reactions to the other Between Two Wars videos, remember the playlist card is going to be at the top. Just click on it and you'll be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as TimeGhost History's YouTube channel, yes, the links are in the description below. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
On August 23rd, 1939, the world is shocked when two sworn enemies sign a pact which promises non-aggression between them in the event of war. Named after the foreign ministers who sign it, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact guarantees peace between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. But this is not the treaty's only provision. A secret protocol is included, dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. It is the final thing Hitler needs to expand his conquest, and it seals the fate of not only the unfortunate nations caught in between the two great powers, but the entire world. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. Now, if you've been following this series, you'll know that the USSR and Nazi Germany are not exactly the best of friends. They both promote...
They are frenemies. If I can say that like that. Yeah, they're frenemies. They are friends when it's convenient, and then they are enemies when it is just a natural, expectation of these two nations. They don't like each other, but they have to be chummy with one another because they are dealing with kind of like the same enemies. When two enemies unite together against a common enemy, that's essentially what's happening here. They're enemies, joining together, fighting against a common enemy. But once that common enemy is gone, then they're back to square one, where they fight amongst each other. Yeah. So they're frenemies.
Ideologies, communism on one side, National Socialism on the other, that have radically different visions of what the world should look like. When Adolf Hitler comes to power in Germany in 1933, some of the first victims of Nazi terror are communists. Then the following year, the Soviets start pushing communist parties throughout the world to ally themselves with more moderate parties in anti-fascist popular fronts. And then in 1936, when civil war breaks out in Spain, both sides fund opposing sides to such an extent that it almost becomes a proxy war. Throughout this, rabid denunciations are consistently pumped out by their propaganda machines. So these enemies suddenly signing a non-aggression pact comes seemingly out of nowhere, has no precedent, and makes no sense, right? Well, Soviet-German relations have always been more complicated than just two adversaries battling it out and then suddenly not. In fact, before Hitler comes to power, the two countries are actually moving closer. In April 1922, German and Soviet diplomats establish relations between their respective states for the first time and renounce all territorial and financial claims against each other in the Treaty of Rapallo.
This doesn't just happen. There is something behind this, okay? Either it's money or it's resources, or it's some sort of consumer goods exchange. Like, there has to be something. They can't just say, no, you know what, let's have peace. We won't be talking to each other in bad faith. No, there has to be something there.
The two have faced isolation from the international community since the Great War, and their agreement to cooperate in a spirit of mutual goodwill sends shockwaves throughout the world. Many worry that Rapallo marks the beginning of a sinister collaboration between two powers looking to upset the post-war order. If you've been watching this series for a while, you'll understand that fear. Germany is bitter about the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which place heavy restrictions on military rearmament and has stripped territory from her. On the other side, the Soviets want to reestablish the larger borders of the former Russian Empire, trying and failing, most notably in the Polish-Soviet War. The Rapallo relationship is intended to work around all of this, and a productive relationship soon emerges. In fact, even before Rapallo is signed, the Soviet Union is giving German industry and military space away from Allied eyes to secretly produce and even test weapons of war like aircraft and tanks, poison gas. Continually fearful of a revolution back home, though, German leaders remain anti-communist, and the relationship is always a troubled one. Still.
So in public, they are frenemies, but in private, they are partners, dealing in some nefarious activities, military-wise, developing weapons, aircraft, and all other forms of technological military advancements. And yeah, it's a partnership that benefits them both until it doesn't.
A range of economic and legal agreements are concluded in 1925. In 1926, the two countries sign a Treaty of Friendship and Neutrality, which they then extend for another 5 years in 1931. But Hitler's rise to power in 1933 dramatically changes the picture. He has made a career out of loudly and publicly bashing communism, in particular, the so-called Judeo-Bolshevik regime in Moscow. In a 1923 speech, he screams, "What is the Soviet Star? It's the symbol of a race which is about to take over power from Vladivostok to Western Europe. The rule of the Soviet Star will only be a paradise for Jews, yet a slave colony for all others." He has also repeatedly called for Eastern Europe and Russia to be conquered as Lebensraum, living space, for the German nation. He looks down on the Slavic peoples, too. The anti-Soviet propaganda in what is now Nazi Germany is virulent, but it does not immediately lead to a change in foreign policy. In fact, in March 1933, Hitler announces that Germany's relationship with the Soviet Union will not change, and in May even re-ratifies the 1926 treaty. Nevertheless, continuous antagonistic speeches and propaganda campaigns soon lead to an inevitable deterioration in relations.
Yeah, it will lead to a deterioration of relations, but both nations know that they need each other for the time being. Economically, militarily, they need each other for the time being.
Government officials do try to stem this, stressing Germany's need for the vital raw materials the Soviet Union has. And as he becomes increasingly involved in managing the economy, Hermann Goering, one of the most powerful men in Germany, takes a particularly close interest. In May 1936, he personally tells the Soviet trade mission in Berlin that he's prepared to assist them in any way possible, and even involves his cousin, Herbert Goering, in trade negotiations. In October that year, a memo is sent round to Foreign Office officials reminding them that Soviet goods are needed now more than ever. And then in August 1937, the German embassy in Moscow was told that the condemnation of Soviet policy should not get in the way of trade policy. On the other hand, Hitler signs the anti-Comintern Pact with Japan in November 1936, then Italy in November 1938, agreeing to fight the global spread of communism. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War also then sees the opposing powers pitted against each other, as I said, albeit indirectly through proxies. All this means that despite some efforts to revive economic relations, the outcomes are mostly disappointing. But meanwhile, Soviet foreign policy has been taking a new direction. Soviet diplomats have slowly been coming around to the fact that the USSR needs a more productive relationship with the Western powers, and the increasingly aggressive rhetoric of Nazi Germany only accelerates this. The Soviets decide to adopt a policy of collective security, a term you might recognize if you saw our 1938 episode on appeasement. It's more or less the same concept here.
No, it's not going to end up well, considering the major powers in the Leagues of Nations and how they were conducting this defense neutrality pact. It's not going to work out. It's not going to work out.
Strategy of mutual defense to contain the Nazi threat. The People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union, Maxim Litvinov, sums up this policy already in December 1933. It can scarcely be doubted that in the present international situation, no war, wherever it may break out, can be localized, and no country can be certain that it will not be drawn into the war once it has begun. The Soviet Union, therefore, is interested not only in its own peaceful relations with other states, but in the maintenance of peace generally. With this in mind, Soviet diplomats begin a policy of rapprochement with the French and even allow themselves to be persuaded to join the League of Nations in September 1934. So, the Soviets are pretty keen on collective security. But again, if you've seen that episode on appeasement, you will know that Britain and France are pretty bad at living up to these obligations. This becomes obvious to the Soviets straight away. Upon joining the League, they enter in collective security negotiations for Eastern Europe. But this struggles to go anywhere, with Germany and Poland both demanding non-aggression pacts over collective security. So to push things forward, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin grants an audience to British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden when he's visiting Moscow in March 1935, something he rarely does for non-communist politicians. He explains to Eden, "There are here in this room 6 people. Imagine that between ourselves, there is a pact of mutual assistance. And imagine that, for example, Comrade Maisky wanted to attack one of us. What would happen? We would all join forces to beat Comrade Maisky. It is the same with the countries of Eastern Europe." Okay, poor Maisky was probably left trembling at Joseph friggin' Stalin singling him out as a potential enemy. But it fails to make much of an impact on Eden.
And you know with Stalin and his paranoia, one day he'll just wake up and say, okay, you know what, he is a traitor. He needs to be arrested, he needs to be executed. So anything can happen, Shem, the poor guy.
British support for the pact is not forthcoming, nor is there any from France, so the negotiations fall through. Now, the Soviets' collective security policy does see some success in May 1935 when they sign a treaty of mutual assistance with France. But this is little more than a piece of paper. And the following years will see collective security unravel as the Allies sink into the pattern of appeasement. France and Britain failed to do anything in the face of the Italian invasion of Abyssinia in October 1935, and remain mostly passive in the face of Germany's remilitarization of the Rhineland during March 1936. The Soviets are disappointed even more when the West adopt a policy of non-intervention during the Spanish Civil War. Most people put continual Anglo-French passivity down to war weariness and their weak economies. But in Stalin's eyes, appeasement has a much more sinister motive. In his opinion, the Second World War already starts in July 1937 when Japan invades China. At the 18th Party Congress in March 1939, he will tell the delegates that a new imperialist war is already in its second year, a war waged over a huge territory stretching from Shanghai to Gibraltar and involving over 500 million people. The map of Europe, Africa, and Asia is being forcibly redrawn. The entire post-war system, the so-called regime of peace, has been shaken to its foundations. In Stalin's eyes, appeasement is not a means to avoid such a war, but to pull the Soviet Union into one, where it will fight against Germany and Japan until all sides are exhausted and the capitalist democracies can dance in and claim victory. Stalin assures his delegates that the Soviet Union will not be drawn into conflicts by warmongers who are accustomed to have others pull the chestnuts out of the fire for them.
Yeah, in the future, whatever he said here, it's going to come into fruition, It's going to come into fruition. But we continue.
Now, as we will see in a minute, Stalin's foreign policy objectives are a bit more cynical than simply wanting to keep himself out of an imperialist war. But such a conspiratorial mentality explains the Soviets' behavior during the Sudeten crisis months earlier in September 1938. It matters little anyway. The great powers meet at the Munich conference without inviting Czechoslovakia or the USSR and agree that Germany can have the Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia is pressured to accept the loss. In March 1939, Hitler occupies the rest of Czechia. And it's clear that he now has his sights on Poland. Even politicians in the Weimar era before him refused to accept Germany's eastern borders and the existence of a Polish nation. And Hitler now sees his chance to restore Germany to its former size and secure Lebensraum. The Allies finally abandon appeasement and get serious about an alliance with the Soviets. But by now, the Soviet Union is totally cynical about Anglo-French intentions. Litvinov is particularly suspicious, telling Maisky that he believes Britain and France will abandon their newly aggressive stance if Hitler makes another peace gesture. These suspicions are only confirmed when, at the end of March, France and Britain jointly guarantee Poland's independence without consulting the Soviets. But this actually puts Stalin in a commanding position. He now controls the European balance of power. See, Germany is against a two-front war, obviously. So the Allied guarantee to Poland means that Hitler has to ensure Soviet non-involvement before he can invade. On the other side, with Germany sitting in the way, the Western powers don't actually have any means to really help Poland, and so need the USSR to assist them if war does break out. The only question now is, which side will Stalin take? The Allies press hard for the Soviets to commit to a triple alliance. Litvinov offers them a plan for one, but it has some pretty strict terms. Not only does it require an all-encompassing war-fighting alliance, but it also asks for a guarantee of all Eastern European states bordering the USSR and a British announcement that their guarantee to Poland is directed solely against Germany. Now that has some pretty dark implications. The Baltic states fear Moscow's territorial ambitions and have no desire to have their security guaranteed by the Soviets. And why would the guarantee for Poland not be against all enemies? The French and British are unenthusiastic about such strict terms, and the proposal makes little headway.
Then you know what that means. Knock, knock, knock. Germans, let's talk.
Well, Stalin sacks Litvinov in early May and replaces him with Vyacheslav Molotov. Now, there is a flurry of speculation at the time, which continues to intrigue historians today, that this is a prelude to Stalin cultivating an alliance with the Nazis. Litvinov is Jewish and supposedly favors an alliance with the Western powers. So maybe his firing is a goodwill gesture. The Nazi government certainly seems to think so. The German press is instructed to cease all polemics against the Soviet Union. And the German ambassador in Moscow, Friedrich Werner von der Schulenburg, tells German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop that he believes Stalin desires an understanding with the Rome-Berlin axis. Okay, we cannot actually definitely say that this is Stalin's intention. Molotov is perhaps the closest to Stalin both politically and personally. And with Stalin wanting to take a much more active role in Soviet foreign policy, the new Foreign Affairs Commissar can be trusted to follow through on whatever Stalin desires. Plus, the new appointment does not see any immediate change in Soviet policy towards Germany anyway, despite the latter's repeated efforts to work out a deal, which I will come to shortly. The Anglo-French-Soviet bartering continues throughout the summer. The Western powers gradually give more and more ground to the Soviet position of an all-out defensive alliance, and eventually agree to formal negotiations. Talks open in Moscow on August 12th, but a hurdle emerges pretty quickly. Soviet diplomats demand that the Red Army have free passage through Poland and Romania. This is not a mere strategic demand. Though there is continual debate on his motivation behind it, Stalin does have clear territorial ambitions in Eastern Europe. The most innocent interpretation here is that he wants to create a buffer zone between the USSR and Germany. A more cynical interpretation recognizes that, although the Soviets are supposedly committed to anti-imperialism, Stalin sees this as his chance to expand his borders and powers to match the old borders of the Russian Empire and beyond. But the Allies just are not willing to let that happen. The Soviet condition basically means selling out Poland and the Baltic states in the name of their security. They refuse the demand. The negotiations break down just 9 days after they began. Looking back 80 years later in hindsight, Poland and the Baltic states were absolutely right about Stalin's motivations and his territorial ambitions to take their lands one way or another. I mean, even at the simplest level, if, for example, Poland or parts of it is to be a buffer, then you don't need the Baltics as a buffer. So why come down on them too, unless you want their territory? Well, The negotiations also failed because Stalin now has another alternative. While all this is going on, Germany has also been trying to woo the Soviets. On June 28th, Ambassador Schulenburg meets with Molotov and tells him that Germany not only wants to normalize relations with the USSR, but improve them, assuring him that Hitler has no Napoleonic plans in Russia. Indeterminate backs and forths like this continue throughout July and early August, with both Schulenburg and Ribbentrop repeating their desire for better relations.
Yeah, better relations. We are not enemies. Hitler does not have any interest in conquering Russia, you know, and Russia has no interest in making an enemy of Germany. Yeah.
Molotov and Stalin slowly warmed to the idea, and finally, on August 17th, while Anglo-Soviet-French negotiations are underway, Molotov hands Schulenburg a formal proposal for a non-aggression pact, along with a secret protocol. Schulenburg pushes for his boss Ribbentrop to be invited to Moscow, and on the 19th, Molotov agrees that he can come the 26th. This is not soon enough. On August 21st, Schulenburg hands Molotov a personal letter from Hitler to Stalin, which tells him that the tension between Germany and Poland has become intolerable. Polish demeanor towards a great power is such that a crisis may arise any day. Stalin concurs, and Ribbentrop arrives in Moscow August 23rd. Stalin does most of the talking, and matters are soon settled. Molotov and Ribbentrop sign a non-aggression pact whose first article states that both high contracting parties obligate themselves to desist from any act of violence, any aggression, and any attack on each other, either individually or jointly with other powers. The announcement shocks the world, and people immediately start asking questions. Britain and France have been pushing for a treaty for months. What is Hitler offering that they can't? Moscow insists that talks with the Western powers failed, not because Germany offered a better deal, but because Britain and France were insincere in their negotiations. But this is a lie, and observers are right to be fearful. The agreement is much more than a non-aggression pact, and is instead an alliance for the territorial division and domination of Eastern Europe. Appended to the public treaty is a secret protocol defining German and Soviet spheres of interest in the event of a territorial and political rearrangement of Poland and the Baltic states. Hitler has given Stalin what the Allies didn't, a free hand in Eastern Europe and the opportunity to revise his borders for the first time in decades. And Stalin has given Hitler the final thing he needs to pursue his conquest. Nothing now stands in his way. As you will see in our next episode, the general consensus of the world at large is that without Soviet assistance, which they now have no chance of getting, the Allies have little chance of saving Poland should Germany invade. They have consistently appeased Nazi aggression, not only enabling Hitler to grow and expand, but also alienating Stalin, who sees their passivity as an active plot to destroy the Soviet Union. Their inaction has blown up in their faces. Hitler's army already finalized invasion plans for Poland back in June, and he is convinced the West won't fight for Poland alone. He tells his commanders in a conference on August 22nd that our enemies are tiny little worms. I saw them at Munich. But what
this non-aggression pact that they have with each other, yes. Russia is not going to interfere with, whatever Germany is doing, but when Germany finally decides we are going to attack Russia, that's when the Soviet Union is going to be pulled into this war, and there's no escape. That's why they are frenemies. They are friends, sort of, here and now, until that time when the friendship is useless, when its effect is no longer, an advantage to both parties. That's when everything's going to unravel, and Russia and Germany are going to be at each other's throats.
will those worms do? Is Eastern Europe lost? If so, will its fall inspire France and Britain to action? In just a few days, those allies will be forced to make that decision. If and when Hitler invades, will they live up to their promise to guarantee Polish sovereignty and be dragged, along with perhaps the entire world, into war? If you would like to verify for yourself that Joseph Stalin wanted to take over the Baltics, you can click right here to watch that happen in 1940 on our World War II in real-time channel. Our TimeGhost Army member of the week is Andrew Goss. It is because of people like Andrew in the TimeGhost Army that we can continue making content like this. Our Between Two Wars series is nearly over, but we have a series on the Indonesian Revolution coming up next and many exciting things ahead. So do the right thing and join the army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv to make TimeGhost evermore the go-to channel for all things history. And thinking back over everything we've covered today, you may remember what Abraham Lincoln once said: "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" It's good vodka.
Okay, guys, that's it with a Soviet-Nazi alliance, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between two wars, 1939, part 2 of 3 by TimeGhost History. Yes, Russia, or should I say, the Soviet Union, they have their ambitions to have Poland, or at least half of Poland, and the Baltic states, to reclaim that glory days of the Russian Empire. And then, of course, you have the Germans on the other side, on the west, that they have their ambitions to continue conquering lands, making living space for the German people. And they'll also have a piece of Poland, and yeah, this non-aggression pact between them, it's just useful for them for the time being, until the war really starts getting dangerous and victory seems to be the order of the day for the Germans. When Hitler feels confident in his forces, confident in his advancing through France and through other European nations, he will then turn his gaze to Russia, and he will begin a surprise attack against their non-aggression pact partners. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, seeing how all of that unfolds again. Because I remember I've been watching some documentaries where they discussed about this, and yeah, it was good. And yeah, the alliance, the League of Nations, well, particularly the the British and the French, yes, they're really not trustworthy partners. They say one thing and then they do the other. And I understand how the Russians might feel about that and why they would eventually turn their backs against the League of Nations and then, try to make a deal with the Germans. It's understandable because, the League of Nations, it's not a serious organization. It's just a talk shop. A talk shop with very, rich and powerful people, and that's all they're doing. It's just talk. There is no backup with their words because they don't have the support of their people in their countries. They don't have the interest in defending all the League of Nations members from any potential threat. It's all about appeasement, all about talking and signing documents and signing treaties, which in the end will mean nothing. And as soon as Germany starts doing its conquest, and as soon as Russia also begins its conquest of the Baltic nations and Poland. So really, I understand how the Russians were feeling about that. And yeah, we're heading slowly but surely into World War II on the European side. On the Asian side, the Japanese have already started they've already started the party, beginning their invasion of China. Yes, of China, yeah. Well, guys, I guess that's it. That's it for today with TimeGhost History. Remember, guys, if you want to check out the original video as well as TimeGhost History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I will see you guys next time. Okay? Bye-bye.